Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So I want you to imagine waking up, grabbing your phone, and before you've even had a sip of coffee, you're just hit with this massive barrage of alerts.
Oh, yeah. The morning doom scroll.
Right. It's breaking news, it's hot takes on social media, 3 new productivity hacks you absolutely have to try today. And there's this underlying sense that if you aren't optimizing every single second of your day, you're somehow falling behind. So you start the day feeling overwhelmed, a little anxious, and just completely scattered. But imagine opening your inbox and finding a letter that perfectly diagnoses that exact modern anxiety. The catch is the letter was written like nearly 2,000 years ago.
It is honestly uncanny how precisely these ancient texts mirror our current psychological state. I mean, today we are immersing ourselves in a really specific collection of correspondence. We're looking at Seneca the Younger's moral letters to Lucilius, and specifically focusing on letters 84 through 92.
Right, and Seneca was a Roman Stoic philosopher writing to his friend, who was a Roman official.
Exactly. And he's attempting to build this framework for a life that wasn't just theoretically sound, but practically bulletproof. Because he was addressing an empire that, much like our modern world, it was drowning in information, obsessed with status, and deeply vulnerable to sudden catastrophic shifts in fortune.
So the mission for this deep dive is to basically extract the machinery of that framework. We want to look at how to filter that scare hose of Bailey information, how to stop moving the goalposts of our own happiness, how to handle the internal storms of our emotions, and perhaps most importantly, how to mentally prepare for the unthinkable.
Yeah, and to build that framework, Seneca actually starts with the very foundation of how we consume information. Because in a world with endless scrolls and infinite tabs open, processing what we read is really the first hurdle to living deliberately.
Right.
And Seneca tackles this in letter 84 by using a biological mechanism that is universally understood, which is the bee. But he doesn't just use the bee as a symbol for busy work or just, hoarding things.
Right, because bees don't just collect pollen and stack it in a tiny warehouse. If they did that, it would just be colored dust, right? The magic happens in the transformation.
Exactly. Seneca points out that bees take nectar from countless different flowers, and they actively blend it. They mix it with something innate to their own biology.
Like their breath, their enzymes.
Yes. And they create something entirely new, which is honey. He actually delves into the scientific debate of his time regarding this process. Some ancient thinkers believed bees just merely collected a sweet dew that fell on leaves, while others argued the bees themselves performed a chemical transmutation.
Kind of funny that they were debating that.
Right. But Seneca's argument is that the biology doesn't change the philosophical imperative. The end result is a profound transformation. If a bee just hoards, it fails. And the same applies to human reading and learning. If we simply swallow information whole, it just sits in our minds as this undiluted heavy mass.
This is literally the ancient equivalent of the modern regurgitation trap. You read a dense article or you skim a summary of a best-selling business book and you just memorize a couple of buzzwords to drop in a meeting or at a dinner party.
Yes, exactly.
You haven't made honey. You're just spitting out the pollen. It hasn't passed into your tissue and blood. And Seneca argues that unless you apply your own supervising care to what you consume, it only enters the memory, not the reasoning power.
And that distinction between memory and reasoning is so critical because memory is just the storage drive, right? Reasoning is the processor. Seneca wants you to digest the material so thoroughly that it becomes indistinguishable from your own mind. He uses another really vivid analogy right after the bee to drive this point home, which is the chorus in an ancient Roman theater.
Oh, right. And the scale of those theaters is important here. I mean, we aren't talking about a small barbershop quartet.
Not at all.
A Roman chorus could have hundreds of performers. You have tenors, basses, baritones, men, women, plus a brass section with flutes and horns playing along. And if you stood right next to one person, you just hear a single isolated tone.
Right, but when you sit in the audience and listen to the collective performance, you don't hear a chaotic, discordant jumble of isolated noises. From all those distinct sounds, a single unified harmony is produced.
Wow, yeah.
The individual voices are entirely hidden within the whole. What you hear is the voice of all together. So Seneca is instructing Lucilius to make his mind like that chorus. We should equip ourselves with countless arts, precepts, and patterns of conduct from different epochs of history, but we must blend them into one harmonious voice.
It's kind of like a modern DJ taking samples from jazz, hip-hop, classical and electronic music. I mean, if they just play the tracks back to back, it's just a playlist.
Exactly.
But if they mix the beats, alter the pitch and layer the vocals, they create a completely original track. You can hear the influences, but the final product is uniquely theirs. And Seneca warns that we shouldn't just be a carbon copy of our favorite author or mentor.
Yeah, he says you should resemble your role models the way a child resembles a parent, not the way a portrait resembles its subject. Because a portrait is just a lifeless imitation.
That's a great way to put it. But achieving that living harmony requires us to be, intensely selective about the raw materials we consume.
Very much so.
Which brings us to a highly controversial stance Seneca takes in letter 88, where he issues this totally scathing critique of what the Romans called the liberal studies.
We should probably clarify what liberal studies meant in the first century, because he isn't critiquing a modern liberal arts degree from a university.
Right. For a Roman, liberal studies were the subjects deemed appropriate for a free-born gentleman. So things like advanced grammar, geometric measurement, music theory, astronomy. They were basically the ultimate status symbols.
Yeah.
If you could debate the finer points of Homeric poetry, you showed you had the wealth and leisure to be educated.
Yeah, and Seneca is shockingly dismissive of this entire curriculum. He plays on the word liberal, which shares its root with liber, meaning free. He argues that there is only one study that is truly liberal, meaning it actually liberates the mind and makes a person free, and that is the pursuit of wisdom. Everything else is just pedantic trivia.
He absolutely roasts the scholars of his day. He singles out a real historical figure, this scholar named Didymus, who supposedly wrote 4,000 books. And what were these thousands of books about?
Oh, this is the best part.
Right. Investigating the exact birthplace of Homer, arguing over who was the true mother of the mythological hero Aeneas, and debating whether the poet Anacreon was more of a womanizer or a drunkard. Seneca dryly notes that he would feel pity for a man who merely had to read 4,000 such useless volumes, let alone write them.
It's brutal, and the mockery extends to the hard sciences as well. He takes aim at the mathematicians and geometricians. A geometrician, Seneca points out, can teach you how to measure the exact dimensions of an estate down to the inch. They can calculate the precise area of a circle. But, Seneca asks, what good is knowing how to parcel out a massive piece of land if you don't know how to share it amicably with your own brother?
Wow.
Right. What good is measuring the exact boundary of your property if you're going to lose your mind with anger when a neighbor accidentally plows an inch over the line?
Okay, wait, hold on. This is where we run into a major modern roadblock. Because we can't all just sit around pondering the nature of virtue while the bridges collapse, the power grid fails, and the Wi-Fi goes down. Aren't specialized technical skills like coding, engineering, or finance absolutely necessary? By dismissing these vocational studies, Seneca sounds a bit like an out-of-touch elitist who just doesn't understand how society functions.
It's a vital distinction to make, and Seneca actually addresses this tension. He is not claiming that mathematics, architecture, or music are evil or entirely useless. He explicitly acknowledges that they contribute to the equipment of life. But he fiercely insists they have absolutely nothing to do with virtue.
Okay, so they're separate categories.
Exactly. They prepare the mind, much like learning the alphabet prepares a child to eventually read philosophy, but they are not the end goal.
So it's a difference between building the hardware and writing the operating system. You can engineer the most powerful, sleek smartphone in the world. That's the technical skill. But if the software running on it is malicious, or if the user uses it to obsessively doom scroll and ruin their mental health, the hardware is useless.
That's a perfect analogy.
The technical skill builds the device, but wisdom dictates how it is used.
Precisely. I mean, you can be a brilliant software developer and use that skill to build predatory algorithms. You can be a masterful financier and remain consumed by a deep, unending anxiety about losing your wealth. Seneca is challenging the assumption that technical mastery equates to a good life. In letter 89, he warns against the academic tendency to overanalyze and chop philosophy itself into microscopic subdisciplines.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he says that whatever you cut so fine that it becomes dust is as good as blended into a mass again. The goal of learning isn't to categorize the dust. It is to amend the mind and guide human conduct.
So the translation to our daily lives here is really about how we process the information we let in. The practice here, the B practice, if you will, is that the next time you finish a dense article or listen to an analysis of a complex topic, don't just extract a quote to sound informed. Take the time to ask, how does this challenge what I already believe? How does this integrate with my existing experiences? You have to mix your own breath into the pollen. If you can't articulate the concept in your own words, using your own lived experience as a filter, you haven't actually learned it yet.
Absolutely. And if specialized knowledge and technical education don't automatically make us good, we naturally progress to the next assumption society makes. Does technological and material progress make us happier?
The big question.
Right. Do better tools and finer luxuries equate to a better human experience?
And to answer this, Seneca takes us on a road trip, basically. He contrasts two physical locations to show how the baseline of human expectation shifts, taking us first to a rural bathhouse and then onto a dusty country road. The scene in letter 86 is incredibly cinematic. Seneca is visiting the country estate that once belonged to Scipio Africanus.
And to really understand the weight of this visit, we have to grasp who Scipio was to a Roman. He was the ultimate embodiment of Roman grit, military genius, and virtue. He was the general who defeated Hannibal in the Second Punic War, earning the title the Terror of Carthage.
So he's a big deal.
Huge. For Seneca to visit Scipio's home is kin to an American visiting Mount Vernon or Gettysburg. It's almost holy ground.
Right, so Seneca walks through this historical estate and focuses entirely on Scipio's bathhouse. We might imagine a grand Roman spa, with columns and pools. But Seneca describes a tiny recess built of rough-hewn stone. It has tiny chinks cut out of the thick walls just to let in a narrow sliver of sunlight without weakening the fortifications.
Very utilitarian.
It's dark, it's buried deep in the house, and it is completely unheated in the luxurious sense. It is just a mean, dingy little room where one of the greatest heroes of human history would go to wash off the literal dirt and sweat of his own farm labor, because Scipio worked the earth with his own hands.
And the contrast Seneca draws with the modern Roman baths of his own time. So the 1st century AD is just staggering. He describes a society that has entirely lost its mind to luxury. People refuse to bathe unless their walls are resplendent with massive, costly mirrors. They demand Alexandrian marbles and complex mosaics made of Numidian stone.
Which was this rare yellow marble imported from North Africa strictly as a status symbol, right?
Exactly. They want their vaulted ceilings enclosed in glass and the water pouring from solid silver spigots.
Seneca says people become so soft that they think themselves poor if they cannot bathe in perfectly filtered water while getting a coat of tan from massive windows that look out over sweeping vistas of land and sea.
It's absurd.
He imagines a wealthy contemporary Roman looking at Scipio's dark stone bath and saying, "Pretty dirty fellows they evidently were. How they must have smelled." And Seneca's response cuts right through the arrogance. He says, "They smelled of the camp, the farm, and heroism."
Oh, that's such a great line. It is a surgical dismantling of the hedonic treadmill. What was originally invented for a simple, necessary use, washing dirt from the body, has been mutated into an elaborate competitive theater of wealth. Seneca observes that the moment a new luxury is introduced to the market, the previous standard is immediately downgraded to unacceptable poverty or viewed as a quaint antique.
We see the exact same mechanic on letter 87, where Seneca applies this critique to travel. He describes a trip he took with his friend Maximus, and they travel incredibly light. They have one carriage, virtually no slaves, and no excessive luggage. They sleep on a simple mattress on the ground.
Just the bare minimum.
Yeah, and lunch takes less than an hour to prepare and consists entirely of dried figs. If he has bread, the figs act as a relish. If he has no bread, the figs are the meal itself. He calls this simple fare his New Year feast every day.
And he contrasts this light, unburdened travel with the suffocating retinues of the wealthy elite. These travelers require outriders, advance guards, and a cloud of Numidian cavalry kicking up dust just to go down a public road.
Just to travel.
Right. And Seneca invokes another historical titan, Cato the censor. Cato used to ride a single, saddle-worn donkey, and part of the animal's flanks were taken up by the simple baggage hanging down. Seneca poses a sharp question. Wouldn't you prefer Cato's humble steed to a modern aristocrat's entire retinue of plump ponies and pacing trotters?
This is where ancient Rome feels absolutely identical to our modern obsession with lifestyle creep. Today, we equate possessing the latest smart home technology, driving a car with a specialized trim package, or, flying first class with living a fundamentally better life.
We do.
We operate on the assumption that if we just get the promotion, we can upgrade our lifestyle, and that upgrade will finally deliver lasting peace. But the marble bath doesn't make the water cleaner, and the outriders don't get you to your destination any faster.
That relentless pursuit of progress is the core of a fascinating debate Seneca recounts in letter 90 with another philosopher, Posidonius.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah, it's great. Posidonius attempted to elevate the status of philosophy by claiming that ancient wise men philosophers were the actual inventors of architecture, tools like the hammer and tongs, the art of weaving, and the cultivation of agriculture. He wanted to credit philosophy with bringing mankind out of the caves and into comfortable civilization.
But Seneca rejects this completely. He refuses to give philosophy the credit for inventing a better hammer. He argues that human ingenuity, cleverness, and the everyday artisan invented those tools. Philosophy's job is not to figure out how to build a mansion with central heating and vaulted glass ceilings.
Yeah.
Philosophy's job is to teach us that we can be perfectly happy, completely at peace, sleeping under a thatched roof.
Right. He writes, "A thatched roof once covered free men. Under marble and gold dwells slavery." He points out that nature provides everything a human being actually requires to survive and thrive. It is artificially manufactured luxury that demands we tear open the earth to mine for gold, dive to dangerous depths for exotic pearls, or build massive multi-story tenements that constantly threaten to collapse. Seneca argues that early humans followed nature, but then avarice, the insatiable desire for more tore communities apart.
Because when individuals began hoarding more than they needed, poverty was introduced into the world because suddenly there were people who lacked what others aggressively guarded.
Exactly.
But wait, let's address the massive billionaire elephant in the room here. Seneca is romanticizing poverty while being one of the wealthiest men in the entire Roman Empire.
Yes, he is.
He was the tutor and prime minister to the Emperor Nero. He owned estates that rivaled the size of small provinces. It is incredibly difficult to listen to a man writing from a sprawling villa with hundreds of servants talking about the joys of eating dried figs and sleeping on the ground. It feels extremely hypocritical.
It is definitely the most frequent and severe criticism leveled against Seneca, and it requires a nuanced, objective look at how Stoicism views wealth. We really have to separate our modern political debates about wealth inequality from the ancient philosophical framework he was operating within. Seneca did not believe that wealth was inherently evil, nor did he believe poverty was inherently holy. The Stoics categorized wealth as a preferred indifferent.
Meaning, if you have the choice between being rich and being poor, you'd obviously prefer to be rich, but it makes no difference to your actual moral character.
Correct. However, Seneca acknowledges that wealth is an antecedent cause of evil. It is a massive vulnerability. It puffs up the spirit, begets pride, and creates a fragile mind that is terrified of losing what it has accumulated. And, to Seneca's credit, he does not hide from his own hypocrisy in these letters.
No, he doesn't.
While riding in that rustic farmer's cart, eating his figs, he admits his own psychological weakness. He writes, "I can scarcely force myself to wish that others shall think this cart mine. My false embarrassment about the truth still holds out, and whenever we meet a more sumptuous party, I blush in spite of myself."
So he's admitting that when a fancy Roman carriage rolls past his donkey cart, he still feels the sting of status anxiety. He hasn't fully cured himself of the desire to look successful in the eyes of the crowd.
That admission of ongoing struggle is really what makes the letters so valuable. He is writing as a patient in the same hospital as Lucilius, not as a perfected god looking down from Olympus. He concludes that true wealth is not about accumulating vast estates. It is about desiring nothing. It is securing peace by removing the craving for riches and the fear of losing them. A person who needs a massive retinue to travel is literally a slave to that retinue.
And the mechanism to test this in our own lives is straightforward, right?
Yeah.
It's the Cato's donkey reflection. Look at your baseline of comfort. Look at the conveniences you have convinced yourself are absolute necessities. The premium subscriptions, the daily expensive coffee, the specific brand of clothing, the upgraded tech.
Yeah.
If you temporarily strip away just one of those conveniences this week, does your internal peace actually collapse?
Yeah.
Or do you realize, like Seneca eating a dried fig, that the human mind is incredibly adaptable and you are perfectly fine without it?
And recognizing that our happiness isn't anchored to external luxuries forces a pivot inward. Because if the marble baths and the geometric measurements of our estates don't matter, what is left? This brings us to the uncompromising core of Stoic philosophy found in letters 85 and 92, which is the absolute sufficiency of virtue and reason.
And Seneca takes a remarkably hardline stance here. He engages in this fierce debate regarding how we should handle our emotions and vices, specifically targeting the peripatetic school of philosophy, the followers of Aristotle.
Right, and the Peripatetics advanced an idea that sounds incredibly modern and intuitive to us. They believed that passions, fear, sadness, anger, desire are deeply natural to the human animal and cannot or shouldn't be eradicated entirely. Instead, they argued for moderation. A wise person should experience these emotions, but keep them in check. Like a little bit of fear keeps you safe. A little bit of anger motivates you to fight injustice.
We hear this today constantly. We talk about healthy anger, productive anxiety, or just letting off a little steam. It sounds perfectly reasonable. But Seneca completely rejects the idea of a moderate passion.
He demolishes it using the logic of contagion. He argues that advocating for moderate passions is like advocating for moderate insanity or moderate illness. Vices and intense emotional passions do not obey the rational mind once they are permitted entry. He compares them to wild predators.
I remember this.
He writes, tigers and lions never put off their wildness. They sometimes moderate it, and then when you are least prepared, their softened fierceness is roused to madness.
It's like intentionally installing a moderate computer virus on your hard drive. You can't tell malware to only corrupt 5% of your files. Its fundamental nature is to multiply and consume the system. If you say, I'm only going to indulge in a little bit of greed, or I'm just going to let myself be moderately furious about this slight, you have essentially opened a back door in your psychological firewall.
Exactly. Seneca warns that passions increase in proportion to their cause. If you validate fear as a reasonable response, that fear will multiply exponentially the closer the terrifying object gets. You cannot invite a tamed lion into your house and expect it to only bite you a little bit when it gets hungry. Therefore, Seneca argues it is infinitely easier to keep a passion out entirely than to try and wrestle it into submission after it has breached the gates of your mind. Reason alone possesses moderation, the passions do not.
So to explain how a person can actually live this way when the world is throwing chaos at them, he uses the analogy of a pilot steering a ship. He notes that a violent storm does not make a pilot a worse pilot. It merely hinders the physical voyage. In fact, a storm is the exact mechanism that exhibits the pilot's art.
That's such a crucial shift in perspective.
Yeah, because anyone can hold the tiller when the sea is perfectly flat. But when the sky goes black, the wind howls, and the ship is taking on water, the pilot's skill is finally activated.
This requires a profound cognitive reappraisal of adversity. If you view your life's goal as simply arriving at a destination with zero friction, then a storm is a tragedy. But if you view your life's goal as practicing the art of navigation, the art of virtue, then the storm is an opportunity. Poverty, pain, betrayal, or hardship do not degrade the wise man. They provide the raw material for him to practice courage, patience, and resilience.
But Seneca pushes this logic to an extreme in Letter 92, and it forces a really difficult confrontation with our modern sensibilities. He applies this not just to external wealth, but to physical health. He asks, does a healthy, pain-free body add to our overall happiness?
And his answer is a definitive no. He explains that external goods, including bodily health, add to the supreme good, which is virtue, in the exact same way a tiny candle adds to the light of the blazing sun, which is to say, they add absolutely nothing. When the sun is shining at high noon, lighting a candle does not make the day brighter. Virtue is the sun.
He uses this grotesque mythological metaphor to mock those who try to blend physical pleasure with philosophical virtue. He invokes Scylla, the monstrous sea creature from Homer's Odyssey.
Right, the sea monster.
Yeah. Scylla has a beautiful, pristine top half the face and breast of a maiden. But she is violently fused at the waist to a horrifying wild animal bottom, complete with a dolphin's tail and the snapping heads of wolves. Seneca says that if you try to stitch divine, rational wisdom together with the sluggish, animalistic desires of the flesh, you create a monstrous hybrid. You are forcing the highest form of human reason to serve the appetites of cattle.
It's a very intense image.
It is, but let's pause and look closely at this because the modern friction here is immense. To look at someone who is suffering from chronic, agonizing physical pain, a terrible illness, or a debilitating injury, and tell them, your pain is irrelevant. It's just a candle next to the sun of your virtue, so you aren't actually missing out on a good life. That sounds void of basic human empathy. It sounds like a philosophy built for robots, not flesh and blood humans.
It is a deeply challenging concept, but we have to understand the psychological armor Seneca is trying to build. He is not denying that pain hurts. He is separating the physical sensation of pain from the mental identity of suffering. We see this mirrored closely in Buddhist philosophy regarding non-attachment, which teaches that while pain is an inevitable biological reality, suffering, the despair, the narrative that your life is ruined, the anger at the universe is a secondary layer added by the mind.
So the idea that the physical pain doesn't have to infect the core self.
Precisely. And to prove this isn't just Stoic posturing, Seneca quotes Epicurus in this very section. This is notable because Epicurus founded a rival school of philosophy that believed pleasure, not virtue, was the highest good.
Oh, that's interesting that he quotes a rival.
Yeah, and Seneca points out that when Epicurus was dying in absolute excruciating agony from stomach ulcers, he wrote a letter calling it the happiest day of his life. How is that possible? Because his mind was completely filled with the joy of his memories and the peace of his philosophical discoveries. The physical agony of his body could not breach the citadel of his rational mind.
So Seneca isn't saying you shouldn't take medicine or seek out a comfortable chair. He explicitly notes that he will choose health and neat clothes if they are available. But he chooses them as preferred indifference because they accord with nature, not because they're the source of his happiness. The goodness lies in the rationality of the choice, not in the object itself.
The practical application here is a radical shift in framing. When a project at work collapses, when a relationship suddenly ends, or when an unexpected physical ailment grounds you, the immediate instinct is to view yourself as the passenger being violently tossed around the cabin by a storm you can't control. Seneca asks you to step into the pilot's seat. You cannot control the barometric pressure of the storm, but you have absolute control over the tiller of your own response. The storm is not in your way. The storm is the terrain where your character is built.
This is the pilot practice for you listening. Next time a setback happens, ask, am I the passenger or the pilot? It is an empowering way to handle the daily turbulence of life. But it is one thing to play the resilient pilot when you get a flat tire or a harsh email. It is an entirely different universe of suffering when the storm is a catastrophic event that permanently alters the landscape of your life.
That's very true.
And this brings us to Letter 91, which contains some of the most emotionally heavy and urgent wisdom in the entire collection.
Yeah, Letter 91 deals directly with the unthinkable. Seneca is writing to Lucilius regarding a mutual friend of theirs named Liberalis. Liberalis is in a state of absolute psychological collapse because of a piece of news he has just received. The Roman colony of Lyon, located in modern-day France, has burned to the ground.
We have to understand the scale of this. Lyons wasn't a frontier outpost. It was a magnificent, heavily populated, deeply prosperous city that had enjoyed 100 straight years of profound peace. It was the jewel of the region. And Seneca writes that only a single night elapsed between the city at its absolute zenith and the city being entirely non-existent. A fire swept through with such speed and ferocity that everything, the monuments, the homes, the infrastructure, was reduced to ash.
In the ancient world, the threat of fire or earthquake was a constant shadow, but the destruction of Lyon shocked Liberalis precisely because of the context. There was no invading army, there was no prolonged siege. The disaster struck during a period of deep, reliable peace. Seneca analyzes Liberalis's grief and identifies the core mechanism amplifying his suffering, which is the shock of the unexpected. Seneca writes, "It is the unexpected that puts the heaviest load upon us. Strangeness adds to the weight of calamities."
Liberalis didn't just lose a city he loved. His fundamental belief in the stability of the world was shattered. He believed that a city at peace, with strong walls and wealth, was permanent. When that permanence was proven false in a single night, the cognitive dissonance crushed him.
To combat this, Seneca introduces the practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. He advises Lucilius, "Therefore, nothing ought to be unexpected by us. Our minds should be sent forward in advance to meet all problems, and we should consider not what is wont to happen, but what can happen."
Right.
He points out a terrifying law of nature. Fortune attacks the highest peaks.
Right.
The more prosperous, stable, and elevated a thing is, the more gravity and chance conspire to pull it down.
He tells Lucilius to look around at the world. Everything is mortal. Not just human beings with beating hearts, but massive stone monuments, entire cities, and spanning empires. He reminds him of how frequently great cities in Asia and Achaia had been swallowed whole by sudden earthquakes. He describes how entire mountain peaks dissolve and how coastlines sink into the sea. The works of nature herself are harassed, Seneca writes. Hence, we ought to bear with untroubled minds the destruction of cities. They stand but to fall.
He reinforces this by invoking the Great Leveler. He shares an anecdote about Alexander the Great, the man who conquered the known world. Alexander began studying geometry, learning how to measure the earth, And as he looked at the geometric reality of the globe, he realized how infinitesimally small his conquered fraction of the Earth actually was.
That must have been a tough pill to swallow for him.
Yeah, Seneca calls him an unhappy man because the mathematics forced Alexander to realize his title of great was a cosmic joke. How can anyone be great in a universe so vast, on a planet so fragile?
The parallels to our modern reality are chilling. We read about lions burning in a single night, and we immediately map it onto our own sudden crises. We think of a global pandemic that shut down the modern world in a matter of weeks, emptying out bustling cities. We think of sudden economic crashes that vaporize lifelong retirement accounts in an afternoon. We think of a devastating medical diagnosis that comes on a random Tuesday, or a wildfire that consumes a neighborhood. The shock Liberalis felt is the exact shock we feel when the illusion of our own stability breaks.
And that shock is exactly what Seneca's premeditation is designed to neutralize.
But wait, let's look at the psychology of this, because modern mental health advice pushes back hard against this idea. Psychologists actively warn against catastrophizing. If I walk around every single day vividly imagining my house burning down, the banking system collapsing, or my loved ones dying, I'm going to induce a state of severe, paralyzing anxiety. I'll flood my nervous system with cortisol. Aren't we supposed to be mindful and present, not obsessing over worst-case scenarios?
That is the most common misunderstanding of premeditatio malorum. Seneca is not advocating for chronic, anxious rumination. Catastrophizing is an involuntary, fear-driven loop where the mind obsesses over a threat and feels helpless to stop it. Seneca's practice is a voluntary, rational, intellectual exercise. It functions much like clinical exposure therapy.
Oh, that makes sense.
In exposure therapy, a patient is gradually exposed to the source of their anxiety in a controlled environment to prove to the brain that the threat can be survived, thereby disarming the fear response.
So by deliberately visualizing the worst-case scenario, you are removing the brain's massive spike of panic when something goes wrong.
Exactly. Anxiety thrives in the gap between our expectation of safety and the reality of danger. When we demand that the universe grant us an impossible permanence, we are setting ourselves up for devastating trauma when the universe behaves naturally and changes. By accepting that everything we love, our homes, our cities, our bodies, is borrowed and fragile, we close that gap. We strip fortune of her element of surprise. And the profound paradox of this practice is that acknowledging you could lose your home tomorrow does not make you hate your home today. It forces you to appreciate it with a startling, brilliant clarity because you stop taking its existence for granted.
It strips away the entitlement. You realize, as Seneca says, in the midst of things which have been destined to die, we live. When you are facing the fear of loss or the actual arrival of a catastrophe, Seneca advises cultivating total equanimity. He quotes a philosopher named Demetrius, who is known for his bluntness. Demetrius said that to him the opinions and gossip of ignorant men were just like the rumblings which issue from the belly. He asked, "What difference does it make to me whether such rumblings come from above or from below?"
It is a crass, brilliantly effective way to completely devalue the anxiety caused by external forces.
And Seneca takes that crude dismissal of gossip and applies it to the very forces of destruction and death. He suggests we should treat the random, violent blows of fortune the exact same way. They are just the rumblings of the universe. They are biological and physical realities happening in the background. The only thing that matters is how the rational mind responds. Because once we stop fearing death, and once we stop demanding permanence from a temporary world, fortune has no leverage over us. We are all equal in death. Seneca writes, "Depart ambition. To all creatures that burden the earth, let one and the same law apply."
Whether you are Scipio washing off the dirt in his dark stone bath, or an aristocrat with a golden ceiling, or a traveler riding on a donkey with dried figs in your pocket, the exact same law of fragility and eventual dissolution applies to you.
It has been an incredible journey through these texts. We've traced the path from the micro to the macro. We looked at how to gather knowledge and digest it like a bee rather than hoarding it. We examined the trap of technical specialization and the endless treadmill of luxury that promises happiness, but only delivers a newer set of anxieties. We looked at the uncompromising nature of the mind, standing firm like a pilot steering through the storms of emotion. And finally, we confronted the unthinkable fragility of our world, learning to look catastrophe in the eye without blinking.
It is a complete, rugged architecture for the human mind, as relevant today as it was when the ink was wet in Rome.
To close out this deep dive, there is one final image from the very end of Letter 92 that beautifully ties all of this together. It's an image about how we view the things we inevitably lose. Seneca is discussing how the rational soul should view the physical body and, by extension, all the material possessions and status we accumulate. He notes that a free, soaring soul looks at the discarded body after death in the exact same way a newborn baby looks at the afterbirth.
It is a jarring, incredibly visceral metaphor.
It is, but it reframes everything. The afterbirth was absolutely necessary for a time. It provided nourishment. It kept you alive in the dark confinement of the womb. But once you are born into the vast, bright, wider world, you don't mourn its loss. You leave it behind because you have grown beyond its usefulness. What if we viewed every loss in our lives, the loss of our wealth, the shifting of our status, the breakdown of our comforts, and eventually the fading of our physical bodies, not as cruel tragedies where things are violently ripped away from us? What if we viewed them simply as shedding the temporary shells that were only meant to sustain us for a season, left behind as the mind grows into something freer?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.